let me introduce our first speaker. Judy Karanchev is currently volunteering as president of the League of Women Voters of Michigan. Prior to that, she was vice president for advocacy for 4 years, from May 2003 to January 2001 and 11. Judy was the executive director of the Michigan Women's Commission appointed by Governor Granholm. Prior to this position, she was executive director for Planned Parenthood Affiliates of Michigan and Planned Parenthood Advocates of Michigan. Judy has also worked for over 10 years on the Michigan House of Representatives policy staff on public health issues, and as an aide for former Kalamazoo State Representative Mary Brown. She has a Master's of Public Administration from Western Michigan. Judy was inducted into the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame in 2012.
Thank you.
She's been a civil rights advocate and women's activist for years. She lives in East Lansing, is married to Robert Klein, former state treasurer.
I am representing the League of Women Voters of Michigan. We are a nonpartisan organization. We are active citizens in government. We're volunteers. The League was formed in 1920. We grew out of the suffragette movement. Here in Michigan, we have 23 local leagues around the state. Here in Lansing, we have an active league, and one of our co-presidents is here, Beth Moore. The other co-president is Camilla Davis. She's back in the back. The league, as you probably are aware of, does a lot of voter service when we do our voter guides and Vote 411. But we also take positions on issues. Today, however, I'm doing an educational presentation. And some of you already know this, but please bear with us for those who don't and for those that are going to see this as a tape. First of all, what is redistricting? Following every census, the distribution of congressional seats across the nation are subject to change based on the population movements. States are tasked with drawing lines for the U.S. congressional and state house and Senate district, and every state determines its own process. Here in Michigan, we have 14 U.S. congressional districts, and we lost one a couple of years ago. We also have 38 Senate districts and 110 House districts. What laws govern how voting maps are drawn? First, we need to look at what the federal and state laws are currently in Michigan and how they impact redistricting. The U.S. Constitution requires that the seats for the U.S. House of Representatives be apportioned to states according to the population census every 10 years. So this will be happening in 2020. I want you to keep in mind how important the census is, because at a recent meeting, I learned that some changes that are going to occur in the census process in Michigan. And this is going to require all of our involvement to make sure the census is accurate with the new changes. In 1964, there was a case here in Michigan, Reynolds versus Sims, at the US level, where the Supreme Court determined that the general basis for apportionment should be based on one person, one vote. Then we have Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is important so that we make sure that we do not deny rights for minorities. Some of the state laws, we have Public Act 463 of 1996, which is a law, meaning it can be changed by the legislature. It's not part of the Constitution, which gives guidelines to the Michigan legislature on how to draw the maps for the Michigan Senate and the Michigan House. And it allows the U.S. Supreme Court to review those maps, which is important for us to remember. There's another Public Act, 221 of 1999. This one deals with the legislature drawing the maps for Congress. Recently, I heard from a former state court administrator who told me about a case in 2002, LaRue versus the Secretary of State, that actually pointed out that this law was questioned because the legislature cannot bind another legislature. One of the interesting things in our history is in 1963, when we adopted our last Constitution, we actually put in an 8-member commission into that new Constitution. That language is still there because it hasn't been repealed. That had 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans. They tried it twice. You can imagine what happened. They never agreed. The Michigan Supreme Court drew the maps. Later on in 1982, that entire section was ruled invalid because we had language in there about land, and that equal protection clause didn't cover that. It only counting what person to vote. Oversight in Michigan. There is some oversight. The governor can veto the plans from the Michigan congressional for the districts at the congressional level or the state legislature. And then, as I said, the state Supreme Court can review the maps. So what's the problem? And our point of view is that partisan politicians manipulate elections to keep themselves and their party in power. In 2015, Nolan Finley in the Detroit News said, "The partisan nature of redistricting leaves the state with districts drawn to consolidate political power rather than to group together citizens with common interests." This all stems from a long history. And some of you are aware of Elbridge Gerry, the Massachusetts governor, who actually signed into a law the map for gerrymandering in Massachusetts. Because it looked like a salamander, that's where we got the term gerrymandering. Redrawing lines to get a particular result. But what's interesting, and I think especially in the days of Hamilton, in 1788, Patrick Henry, who did not like the new Constitution, actually drew borders for the 5th Congressional District so that it could contain as few supporters as possible for the Constitution. He was trying to block James Madison. So this is not new. It's been around for a while. This is probably one of the best tools and workshops. We actually cut this up and play with them, but we don't, obviously not doing that here today. But you can see on the far, it would be your left side, if we have 50 people and 60 are, and we're not using partisan, 60% of us are blue and 40% are red. You can see how that would be divided if we divided the room. If you wanted perfect representation, you could draw the line straight down. You would have 2 red districts, 3 blue. Okay, so you wanted to do something evil. So you would draw only blue districts. Look how you do that. This is, Walt will get more into this with packing and cracking, but you can see how you get 5 blue districts out of that same group and 0 red districts. Or look how you can get the red more in the last drawing with the zigzag, so you get 3 red districts and 2 blue. This is what's happening. This is just a map of Michigan's congressional districts. Walt will talk more about specific districts, but out of the 435 congressional districts, we have 14 here in Michigan. Each of them needs to represent about 710,000 people. They're elected, as you know, for a 2-year term. What happened in 2016 in the recent election was The Republicans actually got 48% of the vote. I rounded them off. And the Democrats got 47%. And others got 5%. But when you look at what number of congressional seats they got, you can see the results of gerrymandering. The Republicans got 9 seats, the Democrats 5. Nationally, this also happened in 2016. Out of 435 seats, Republicans in the House lost 6 out of 435 seats. Nationally, there were 49% for Republicans. Nationally, there were 49% for Republicans, 48% for Democrats. However, the Republicans have 241 seats, and the Democrats have 194. Nowhere near what the percentage should be if you were doing this fairly. The Michigan Senate districts look like this. There are 38 of them. This time you're down to about 212 to 263,000 people in a district. They serve 4 years and they have term limits. Democrats got 49.3. This is in 2014 because they were not up this year. You can see the result, though, in the number of seats. The Republicans got 27. The Democrats got 11 out of the 38. The percentages are pretty skewed. In 1998, that was the last time the Dems had control of the Michigan Senate. That was when 2 senators, some of you might remember, Phil Maston and David Sorokin, were recalled. Since that time, it has remained in control of the Republicans. The State House, I must have missed my map, huh? There's the State House map. And you can see, Walt will be going into more of these districts, but we have 110 of them, and they contain from 77,000 to 91,000 residents. We just had an election, and you can see the results again. 49.2% voted for the Republicans, 49.1% voted for the Democrats. But then if you look at the number of seats, the Republicans got 63%, the Democrats, 63 seats, the Republicans got 47. There are people that do the calculations on what's a contested seat. If you don't take term limits into account and you don't take incumbency into account, there are about 30 districts out of the 110 that could be in that margin from 45 to 55%. The rest are decided, frankly, in the primary. So what are the results? The vast majority of districts aren't competitive. This impacts policies as well as elections. And the party in power actually meets behind closed doors and draws voting maps that directly benefits itself. Again, we're talking about Michigan, but you have to remember both Democrats and Republicans use map drawing for their advantage. Sue Smith and I, when we were doing the maps at the legislature, I actually attended most of the House and Senate election committee meetings where the bills were discussed. The bills had no maps in them. They were just opening bills about redistricting. We went to hearings, we advocated for transparency and all of those things that the League would advocate for. And all of a sudden, on June 29th in 2011, the legislature passed House Bill 4780, and then for Congress. And then on June 29th, the same day, the legislature passed Senate Bill 498, which covered the state legislature. When we went to those hearings, the only thing that was in the bills, and we weren't able to get a copy, were track numbers. There were no maps at that point. House and Senate members, I understand, had seen it the day before. The press never saw it, as far as I know. The bills were signed into law by the governor. So obviously, there was no transparency. There were no public hearings on those maps. How did this happen? And I'd have to tell you, everybody should buy a copy if you really want. And I'm embarrassed to say the topic, but I have to anyway. The title, it's called Rat Fucked. And here's the title. It's by David Daly. This is an unbelievable resource. When you read the chapter on Michigan, you'll have more insight about what really happened. But REDMAP is an acronym that was coined by the Republicans, and the Redistricting Majority Project was headed by Republicans in early 2010 to gain control in democratically controlled legislatures. They focused on Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, North Carolina, Virginia, Wisconsin, and Florida. They targeted races, and they won. Michigan was one of their targets. This whole adventure by the Republicans, this REDMAP, cost $30 million. That's the cost of one US Senate race. They did this nationwide. In 2008 in Michigan, the Democrats were in control. By the end of the REDMAP targeting in 2010, the Republicans had gained 20 seats. The maps were drawn, and they take credit for it in this book, by a man named Jeff Timmer and a man named Bob LeBrant. So I really recommend you looking at this book and seeing how it was done, and especially the detail it goes into on how they drew Brenda Lawrence's congressional district number 14. Redistricting impacts public policy. For example, the priorities for Michigan's budgets have changed during the last 10-year period from 2003 to 2013. You've seen things happen with education budgets you may or may not like, or with transportation funding. Or as my husband told me to tell you about, last week in the House Taxation Committee, the committee reported out House Bill 4001 to eliminate Michigan's income tax, in spite of the fact that EPIC MRA polling shows that 74% of the public favor keeping the income tax. They can do that because they are in safe seats. That's putting the fox in charge of the hen house, and it's a conflict of interest. So what is the solution? Karl Rove says, when you draw the lines, you make the rules. He says that in this book. So change the rules so the process is fair, transparent, and impartial. There are a range of options. The legislature, which we have here, you all know, where they submit them, the legislature draws them, submits them to the governor, and maybe they go to the Supreme Court. It depends on the state. There are advisory commissions, which are just like it says, advisory to the legislature. There are backup commissions where they take over if the legislature fails. And then there are politician commissions, which are elected officials, where elected officials may actually serve on the commission. And then there's independent commissions. And independent doesn't refer to the political party. It refers to independent from the legislature, where citizens draw the map. There's no approval by the legislature or the governor. We have 26 states where it's all in the hands of the legislature, Michigan being one. Florida's a slightly different color because they've adopted, with the League of Women Voters actively working on this down there, they've adopted criteria for the legislature to use. 5 states have advisory commissions, and those are Maine, New York, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Virginia. And there are 5 backups commissions in Connecticut, Illinois, Mississippi, Oklahoma, and Texas. And there's one that's pretty unusual, that's Iowa, where they use something called the Legislative Service Agency, kind of comparable to our Legislative Service Bureau here, that then gives it to the legislature, and the legislature doesn't seem to play with that. There are 7 states that have a politician commission: Arkansas, Colorado, Hawaii, Missouri, New Jersey, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. There are 6 states that have an independent commission: 4 Republican states and 2 Democratic states. You can see there are Alaska, Arizona, California, Idaho, Montana, and Washington. And we don't have time to go into all of those, but there are some alternatives worth thinking about. In California, they have 14 members, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, 4 from neither party. They actually, unlike our legislature, held 34 public hearings on the maps. They received 22,000 written comments. In Arizona, they have 5 members, 4 from the House and Senate majority and minority leaders, and 1 they appoint from neither party. And Florida is the one that adopted standards so that you don't benefit one political party over another. And Ohio, where they approved recently a bipartisan commission with 7 members. And this plan does not go to the legislature either. The US Supreme Court actually had to rule on the Arizona case. Recently, a group of the legislators said the commission took away their power that they believed they had from the US Constitution. On June 29th, in 2015, the US Supreme Court ruled that an independent commission is constitutional. So that's important to keep in mind. There have, and there are continuing to be, other court decisions. You cannot use race to justify your maps. And the US Supreme Court ruled unanimously that drawing them based on the number of people who live in the district is constitutional. Texas was trying to do it based on voters. There are some new court cases, and I'm not a lawyer. Whitford versus Gill, which is fascinating right now to watch, and you can Google this. It changed names during the process because of the election. This is going to go all the way to the Supreme Court. A recent speaker, I heard Michael Lee from the Brennan Center, doesn't expect a ruling till 2018, but who knows? This is where the efficiency gap is being used and where Mark Brewer announced he was going to file a similar lawsuit here in Michigan. He has not filed it yet. And then there's North Carolina versus Covington, which is new, where they believe they've packed African Americans into districts. Both of those are still in the court. If you want to know more about laws, the Brennan Center has some really good information. So here in Michigan, what could we do? We could ask the legislature to introduce a bill and pass it and put it on the ballot. That actually happened in Ohio. It takes 2/3 of the legislature to do that. It doesn't go to the governor. Or Michigan citizens can initiate a petition drive to allow a vote on the issue if they gather enough signatures. Probably over 400,000 need to be gathered to go through the process. Recently, Representative John Hoadley and Representative Jeremy Moss introduced bills that they introduced in last session, HJRB and House Bill 4122. The bills are in House Elections Committee. These bills introduce a plan similar to California's, and you might want to look at that. At this time, there is no petition drive. So what is the goal? The League believes to ensure that every vote counts, that every eligible voter can have a say, that our elections represent the will of the people, and that our government is and of and by and for the people. Some questions have to be addressed. Thanks. I'm sure some of you are ready to draft the legislation now, and I just want to point out that some questions have to be answered, and this comes from a really good source called A Citizen's Guide to Redistricting with Levitt wrote. You have to decide when to draw the lines. I won't go into all the categories. You have to decide who draws the lines, how to draw the lines, and where to draw the lines. These are not easy questions, and if you take the time to look at his book, I guess it's a book. This is it from the Brennan Center. It's still available online. There are redistricting principles, and they were, this is a long list, and I know you can't read it, but you can find this on Common Cause's national website. Redistricting Principles for a More Perfect Union. And I'll just pull out some. Full and accurate counts for all communities. It deals with prison gerrymandering. It deals with protecting racial minorities and access to information. There were 14 groups that endorsed this. The League did not, and I don't know the answer yet. But you can see these are the 14 groups. Some of our sponsors here today were some of those. Again, it's available on Common Cause's website. So to wrap up, the League of Women Voters of Michigan and the League of Women Voters United States have been working on a democracy agenda with a lot of other groups. And we really support protecting voters, election reform, money in politics, campaign finance, redistricting, and fair and impartial courts as part of our democracy agenda. Redistricting is just one of the issues. It won't change everything. In summary, when we vote, we want our elections to be fair, our votes to count, and our voices to be heard. The process of drawing election maps should be transparent, impartial, and fair. Partisan politicians manipulate elections to keep themselves and their party in power. It's a conflict of interest. And because I know I'm going to get asked this, I'm just going to put this up here now. The status of the League's activities. We have a C3 and a C4. As you noticed on the bottom of our slides, it says Education Fund. That's our C3. LWVMI is our C4. The LWVMI adopted a statement of position on redistricting in 2012. In order to get a position, we actually have to reach consensus with our members. So this has a lot of support, and it's on our website. In 2015, we worked to train speakers and received funding from some generous groups, and we're able to do over 70 town halls and presentations for other groups around the state. We continue to provide speakers whenever we're asked, like today when Patrick called me to come to his den a few weeks ago, and we grew into this cafeteria. The League, LWVMI, has not endorsed a ballot proposal or joined a coalition to do so that's working on one. We are aware of the possibility of groups doing so. The League board will review and evaluate the possibility of any campaign based on what is in the proposal and the probability of the success of the campaign. So thank you all for being here, and we'll talk more later.
I want to introduce Walt Sorg. Walt was the Speaker's Press Secretary under Bobby Krim, Speaker of the Michigan House from Flint, where I'm from. He was Assistant Executive Director of the State Bar of Michigan. He was Public Affairs Bureau Director in the Department of Commerce in Governor Blanchard's administration. Walt is a retired journalist and communications consultant. He hosted a popular morning talk show on WILS in Lansing, and he continued that program on Mid-Michigan's first internet radio station. Walt has received state and national awards in journalism and in public relations. He's a proud graduate of Michigan State University and has lived in Mid-Michigan most of his life. Walt has been involved covering politics as a reporter as far back as George Romney's campaign for governor. He serves with me on the Nonpartisan board of the Michigan Election Reform Alliance, and he's chair of its Redistricting Committee.
I'm going to get a little bit more into the political nuts and bolts. I want to make it clear, even though I'm sure all of us have partisan leanings one way or another, this is not about being a Democrat or a Republican. My family lives in Maryland, which is the most gerrymandered Democratic state in the nation. It is but ridiculous what they have done down there to basically obliterate the Republican Party's ability to elect members of Congress or to control the legislature. In Michigan, it's the other way around. This is a national disgrace. It is something, though, that can only be cured on a state-by-state basis. We can fix Michigan. We can't fix Maryland. They're working on it in Illinois. They're working on it to revise the process again in Ohio. This is going on all over the nation. We have some help, though. We have help from both parties. Patrick mentioned some former presidents. We have others who are helping us as well.
Here are some of the things that are more popular than Congress. Hemorrhoids, nickelback, traffic jams, cockroaches, root canals, colonoscopies, herpes, even herpes. They couldn't beat herpes in the polls. Gerrymandering has created an absurd reality that politicians now pick their voters instead of the voters picking their politicians.
The hell with you.
You thought that every 2 years in November, you're going to the polls to pick your representative, right? Wrong!
You cold-blooded bastard.
In California, the system was rigged so bad that between 2002 and 2010, we held 265 congressional elections. Guess how many districts changed party hands? Only one! Using gerrymandering, our politicians drew their district lines so safely that even while congressional approval ratings went sometimes down into the single digits, they couldn't lose. The former Soviet Politburo had more turnover than California politics.
You really believe that you're inside a movie?
But we fixed it. We took the power of drawing the district lines away from the politicians and gave it back to the people where it belongs.
Good idea.
I mean, we have proven that gerrymandering can be permanently terminated. Share this video if you think it's time to end gerrymandering in America and to make our politicians sane again.
Thank you very much, Nigel. This is the 14th Congressional District. It is nationally famous. It is an entire chapter in the book that Judy so indelicately mentioned earlier. Brenda Lawrence, 78.5% of the vote in the last election. Not bad. But look at this sucker. Look how it goes. There we go. It starts down here in the downriver Detroit, goes wandering over 8 Mile Road and up and around. See that little hole there? That's Farmington. Gotta get that Farmington out of there. And it goes all the way up and it snakes over here a couple of blocks into Pontiac. Brenda's got a pretty safe district. The term is called jam and cram. This is the 76th House District, State House District over in Grand Rapids. Makes sense, doesn't it? Winnie Briggs wins by 18%. She basically has every Democrat in West Michigan somehow put into her district. This explains, if you talk about racial gerrymandering, this explains what's going on in Southeast Michigan right now. Those colored dots all represent 25 voters of different ethnic backgrounds. Guess which ones are the brown dots? Those are African American voters, which are crammed into 2 districts, and you can see why they went all the way up into Pontiac to do that, because they had to pick up more African American voters up there, and then the 13th district is the same way. Then you've got all those other different colored dots are Asian, non-Hispanic, and Hispanic, and then of course the blank space is Caucasian voters. That's gerrymandering in a bunch. In the state house elections that we just went through, only 19 of the 110 were decided by what's considered a competitive margin. It was a little bit distorted because of the presidential race. There are a few more competitive districts than that, but not a whole lot. In Congress, they were all landslides, all of them. The smallest margin of victory was 13.7%. 14 of the 16 was over 15% margin. There were no competitive races for Congress. Gerrymandering protects the status quo. It protects politicians in both parties. It doesn't protect the voters. And it makes change very, very difficult. Judy talked about this. One party won the state house statewide by 3,000 votes, exactly 3,000. Yet it won a 63-47 majority in the House. 2014, the party that got fewer votes got more seats. That's wrong. 2012 election, same thing. This is how our state constitution starts. It's the first words in our constitution. But the reality is, as Judy was talking about, the real political power is in drawing the maps. As Karl Rove said, he who draws the maps controls the power. And right now that power is with the politicians and not inherent in the people. Politicians. The key elements of reform, Judy was talking about this a little bit earlier, but I want to keep it for Citizens Commission is what I'm going to be talking about. I personally and the Michigan Election Reform Alliance as an organization is very committed to the idea that it should be citizens making decisions and not politicians, which is a little more difficult in Michigan than it is in some states. Professional partisans should not be a part of the process at any point in the process. The reality is, even in California, which has probably the fairest system in the country right now, the party leaders in the legislature do have some input into who serves on the commission. They have a limited veto power on certain members. It's obviously got to conform with the U.S. Constitution. That's a good starting point. The Voting Rights Act, very important to make sure that minority rights are not trampled, as happened for years and years and years before the Voting Rights Act. Prison inmates counted in their home addresses rather than in prison. That's really important in the state house. In Jackson County, the state representative district that includes all the prisons, 10% roughly of the adults in that district cannot vote, because they are permanent guests of the state. That's a big difference that could be used to really alter the maps. The same is true in Ionia County and Chippewa County. Those 3 districts are really distorted. For the state Senate, it's not as big a deal because the districts are larger. For Congress, it's really kind of a rounding error, but still it is something that needs to be reformed. Equal population obviously has to be the start, and right now we've got a system in the state Senate. The largest district is about 5% over the ideal number, the average. The smallest district is 5% under. It's a 10% spread. There's no reason for that, given the technology that is now available. You can have districts that are almost equal in population without causing any real problems for the clerks by splitting up towns or splitting up precincts. It can be done very, very precisely if you have the will to do it. Communities of common interest being maintained. hard concept to understand at first to get your hands around, but consider the Lansing area. Would you say that the people of Lansing, East Lansing, Meridian Township have an awful lot in common with the folks in Delta Township or DeWitt? Would that be reasonable? That's 3 congressional districts. None of the congresspersons who represent the Lansing area live within 80 miles of this city. But it is split into 3 areas. The most outrageous one I've seen anywhere is in Texas, which is the home of a lot of outrageous stuff. Austin, their capital city, like Lansing, is split into 7 pieces for 7 congressional districts. Austin, which is just as liberal as East Lansing, has 7 Republican members of Congress. Tom DeLay did a hell of a job before he got convicted. Geographically contiguous and compact, it's not the most important thing because even districts that look like they make sense can still be gerrymandered. The process does have to be open as well. You want to minimize the division of cities and townships. Some of you are old enough to remember George Wallace and his pointy-headed liberals. That's what they'd be screaming about. And then another suggestion is to have the commission composed of retired appellate level judges, which is really exclusionary because you basically got a bunch of senior citizen lawyers doing the whole thing. Plus, some folks did some checking. There aren't a lot of them around. They've either moved to Florida. Former Chief Justice Brennan's a friend of mine. He's down in Florida. Or they've died. So there's not a lot of them available to serve. It's a difficult one. This is my favorite. Turn it over to D'Antonio, Izzo, Carbon, Bayline, and we'll get them now. Hey, we're paying them enough. Let's get some work out. Of course, then we get vision for the vaccines. And it probably wouldn't work out. And Junior's talking about the petitions. You need 315,654 valid signatures. And you've got 180 days to collect them. It's 180 days from the date of the first signature until you walk into Ruth Johnson's door at the Secretary of State's office. So really, you've got about 175 days by the time you process stuff and go through all the paperwork. That's about 15,000 signatures a week. That's a heck of an enterprise, no matter how you slice it. And the legislature's made it really spent as hard as they possibly can. Okay, that's an optimistic number. You really want to shoot for 14,000, 15,000. So that's the challenge that we are facing. One of the forums we've had, we've got a feedback form. If you'd like to weigh in, that issue of how do you select an independent citizens commission is very difficult in this particular state because we don't have the partisan registration. And we would really like everybody's idea who wants to weigh in. It asks for your name and your email on the form. If you don't want to put it there, don't. You can just check off your favorite. You can leave comments. If you got ideas on other things, put it on there as well. And then it'll be shared with a lot of the organizations that are working on redistricting reform right now and may go to the ballot this year. They may not. I'm hoping they do. And that would be very useful because it's a very, very difficult issue.
So then the question is, what is a citizen? And what is a citizen supposed to do? And the simple answer that we have is citizens are supposed to get involved with other citizens. They're supposed to connect. How can we help you connect? Well, look around you. We're going to give you 4 opportunities. Specifically, I'll list them. Bob's going to talk, Katie's going to talk, and then we'll go to questions. But then I also want to tell you that behind the 4 groups that we're going to tell you about today, there are at least between 18 and 24 actively involved in this issue all over this state. So if you decide this is an issue you're interested in, and you keep your head above water and connect it to some group, you're going to find out about all of these initiatives as they go forward. The first group is my group, Michigan Election Reform Alliance. We could really use 2 or 3 active board members. We meet monthly by phone. You could contribute and help grow our organization. We're involved in advocating to expand voter registration and reduce obstacles. We're involved in fair elections administration.
The ACLU is interested in this issue because we protect the fundamental rights of citizens. One of the fundamental rights is the right to vote. Clearly, a Democrat in the state that is residing in a gerrymandered district doesn't have the same vote count that a Republican does because there were about 11 members of the Michigan Senate are Democrats. The rest are all Republican, even though the number of votes for each in the last election was about the same. So clearly, we believe that if the right to vote is curtailed or minimized, we could step in, and certainly that's the case here in Michigan. So we are very committed to this issue. I know on November 9th last year, we woke up and said we got to do something about our democracy, and that's why we're here. We had in Michigan, from last November until now, an increase in our membership from 10,000 to 30,000. It's huge.
So I'm part of Count My Vote, and it's Count MI, as in Michigan, clever, right? Vote. So you should have a page on your table. We have a Facebook page, a Twitter, an Instagram, email, and website. Our website is www.countmivote.org. And as is mentioned, we really just formed out of a group of citizens who were sitting around talking about why hasn't anything changed with gerrymandering. We learned about it in civics class, and after we started doing some research, we saw that about 20 different legislative attempts had been taken in Michigan to change something, and that both sides of the aisle were not willing to do anything about it, and depending on who thought they were going to win, they would abandon petitions to do something about it. Just because you think you're going to be the one to gerrymander it the next time doesn't make it right. Does not. And so we said, why don't we just see if there's other people interested? So we formed a Facebook group, and within a week we had 300 members, which was kind of crazy because we weren't advertising. It was a private, closed group. You had to know other people to join or whatever it was. And from there, it's really just taken off. We have over 1,500 people signed up for volunteering or wanting to do something about gerrymandering. Some are more core volunteers. We have 6 different committees that are working on just different aspects, seeing how do we support the efforts already going on, how do we make sure we're calling our legislators, letting them know that we care about this, and what does a solution look like? I think Walt made a great point. If you don't ever start talking about that part, how do you ever expect anything to change? And we have some examples of other states, like we said, but Michigan is unique. And so if you're interested in getting involved in some kind of way, we are completely nonpartisan, and we ask that you're representing yourself as an individual. So we all know we all work for different places, or maybe you're really passionate about your personal political party, but we're trying to find a solution for everybody, for just being a Michigander, not for being anything else, just with that focus. So you can come online, or we do email and call too, or meet in person, so that's exciting. But really whatever your interest is, originally when we only had around 300 people involved, somebody was like, I love wood carving. Can I do something for gerrymandering? And I was like, heck yes, you can. So we started trying to figure out how you can carve wood districts so that if you went to a fair or something and you saw that, that 8-mile mess that we saw up there, that draws some attention, or having kids play with stuff. At our presentation yesterday, we had some Legos that were made out of the districts that you can kind of play with. And it's all about, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't be intimidated to get involved in the political process. And I think the political environment has made us that way. I think a lot of us are like, what can I even do about this? I just hear crazy headlines and I feel powerless. And that's not the case. Because in Michigan, we can do things about it. You're allowed to get involved civically. So whatever your skills, or if you want to be learning how to do something, you want to start knowing about policy, whether you have experience or not, we invite you to come see what we're about and come volunteer if you'd like to. We're not any kind of legal entity or anything like that, really just volunteers hanging out together, seeing what we can do about gerrymandering. So thank you so much for letting us be here today.